Morning, Deirdre.
Good morning, Tom. How are you today?
Good. Where am I?
Well, you are on the New England shoreline. I'm not quite sure I know exactly which lighthouse they are. You know, they're all painted differently, but my guess is that's the Massachusetts shore, Cape Cod or northward.
It is. It's the Cape Cod. Um, what are they? What's the official name? My mind is
Is
gone.
it the
National
National
Seashore.
Shore?
It's the Cape Cod National Seashore. I couldn't even remember Shake Shack just a few seconds ago, dude. I'm having a bad day. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah. Well, I would just recommend that everyone get out to the National Seashore out there. It is just beautiful.
It's
Beautiful.
spectacular. And for those who don't know, it is when you have the hook, right? You've got the Massachusetts hook that comes out on it's the seashore right here on the hook, right? That goes out to the Atlantic Ocean.
Exactly.
And it's spectacular. We don't know exactly where this is, but we're guessing that lighthouse. I'm guessing, and you and I talked about this lighthouse before, I think. That lighthouse we think, is on the very southern tip of the hook area of the seashore. We think. We don't know.
I
It's
think
not a
so.
lighthouse I'm familiar with.
Because way out at the end, it's all white sand and
Mhm.
beautiful dunes, and that doesn't quite look like the turf
No, and
behind
we
you.
know the dunes would be on the other side where the lighthouse is, but
Right.
it's not this particular area. Even when we know the area, it's this on both sides, and
Hmm.
so it's likely not, since most of this looks not white sand.
Not white sand.
So we have spent a couple of minutes now, Deirdre, talking about the Massachusetts coast, which is near and dear to my heart, and I know you love the nature.
Absolutely.
Um, so tell me, what is our topic for today?
Value exchange. Now, remember that this is a weekly brief, which is different from our longer form videos. In our weekly briefs, we go beyond the basic information to talk about how to accomplish what we're talking about. And we give an example of a company that everyone knows just because it's a good reference point. So, what we're talking about today is value exchange. It's a term that we keep using, and we finally said, you and I, we've got to define this. We've got to talk about it specifically. And
You
once
know,
you
Deirdre,
start,
it does help if we were to define it even for ourselves first before we keep talking about it, right?
which I will do right now, and but just
No,
mention,
to be fair, you and I, in some ways, coined this term a number of years ago because we're uncomfortable with the fact that value proposition doesn't automatically cause you to think both sides of the equation. And
well,
right,
it doesn't really at all. The whole underlying meaning behind value proposition is that a company puts something into the marketplace, expecting the marketplace to perceive value in it. And there are ways that people can test for that the value exchange is there and so forth. But what we think, and this is probably because we've dealt with far too many students who are designing entrepreneurial companies and forget that they need to make money to keep the company going, that there's no cash flow going. And that's how we came up with this whole idea that we're articulating now, which is value exchange. Yes, you start with a value proposition and you put something in the marketplace, hoping that the marketplace perceives the value. But that's just the first half of it. You get the value back, the exchange, when the marketplace gives you something for the value that you provide. At a very simple level, they pay you for it, they give you revenue for it. At other layers, they may give you recommendations. They may participate in things that you do. They may support you in multiple ways. And this is particularly true for not-for-profit entities who aren't looking to make a profit, but who want participation in their activities and recommendations from the people who, good words from the people who do participate in their activities. So that's what the value exchange is. A company or an entity gives something to the marketplace, it proposes value in it, and they get confirmation of the value proposition by getting a return. That's how you think about it. And then we go on to make it even more complicated because we identify three types of value exchange. I mean, we don't stop at just a simple definition. We make it more complicated for our listeners. The first type of value exchange we identify as an opportunity. And this is the most basic form. It's where a company recognizes an opportunity in a marketplace, a strategic gap, we like to think of it as, and does something, provides something to meet that opportunity that it perceives, and gets the value exchange when the marketplace says, I like your way of meeting this opportunity. Here's revenue in exchange. And that's an opportunity value exchange. Another type of value exchange, and this is something, again, that so many of our students just forgot about, is the investment value exchange. Anytime there's an investment of any sort in an entity, there's an expectation of some return. At a very basic level, an entrepreneur investing sweat equity in this company expects that the entrepreneur will be able to build a business and get the entrepreneurial satisfaction of building a business. But in a more investment-oriented point of view, if that entrepreneur persuades a venture capitalist to invest funds, the venture capitalist expects financial returns for the investment in the entrepreneurial venture, probably a multiple of the investment, 4, 5, up to 10 times of an investment. If a company invests in a new initiative, it expects there to be a return on that investment. It could be that they develop a new line of business or a new product line, or even that they update their current products so that they can maintain market share. There are all sorts of returns there that a company can get for investing in something new in the business. So that's what the investment is, that you provide resources or funds into something and you get back what you expect from it. The third level is getting a little more sophisticated here, but it's still an easily understood concept. We call this at the level of institutional and leadership value exchange. And what that is, easiest way to think about institutional value exchange, and it's slightly simplistic, but it'll get the idea across, is it's the branding and the recognition of the brand. That, for example, that if a company does its value exchange, acts as a good corporate citizen, builds its brand, it gets recognition of that brand back from the marketplace. And then that starts to act as almost a treadmill, where when the marketplace recognizes the brand, then the company can actually, there are studies on this, increase revenue because of the value of the brand in the marketplace. Same is true for good leadership, that when a company is known for the quality of its leadership, it gets the marketplace recognition and therefore a treadmill of sorts. When I was thinking about this a few days ago, I was thinking, well, I saw this in my own career. At the very beginning of my career, Tom, you know, and some of our listeners know, I started my career in the publishing industry. And when an aspiring young editor is looking for a job in the publishing industry, they want to work with the well-known editors. They want to work with the well-known publishing companies because that's how they best learn how to be a good editor themselves. So they will pursue jobs in those companies. And that's how those companies and those editors maintain their prominence. They get the best talent looking for and working with them and so forth. It works the same on Wall Street. Young MBAs want to work with the top level finance companies because that's how they learn the most. and get the most value and provide the most value because that's what's valued by those companies and so forth. People want to work with the top technology companies out in Silicon Valley. These are forms of institutional and leadership value exchange. Mentioning Silicon Valley gets me right back to our subject company, and that is Apple. Um, well-known, high-quality brand, high-quality leadership, both of which work to enable Apple, the company, to continue to get the opportunity value exchange and the investment value exchange. So let's talk about this a little bit, and I'll talk about it just for a few minutes here, and then turn it over to you because you know so much more about Apple, the company, than I do. In fact, it was you who got me to start to use Apple devices. Now it's 20 years ago, was that, Tom?
I think it
But,
was,
but,
yeah.
but you were using those from the beginning. In fact, when I started out, I bought my first personal computer in 1985, and I remember it was an IBM PCXT, which is what everyone was buying at the time. One of those big industrial grade desktop things, and it was wonderful. I loved it. But at the same time, people were starting, or within a few years, people were starting to buy these cute pink and turquoise and rose Apple devices, the Apple II. And it was a different type of person who bought the Apple II. Now, I was a business person, getting my MBA, building my business career, while creative people were buying the Apple IIs, not necessarily for their design, which was lovely, but because of the software that and the work that they could do on an Apple II that wasn't in the IBM. Now we're starting to get the beginnings of an opportunity exchange and an institutional value exchange here as well, building the brand. Because the customers were different and they started to buy because of what the Apple provided that was different from these business-like IBM devices. And then subsequently, of course, IBM over the next decade, 2 decades, continued to provide this opportunity value exchange in different ways. Let's talk, smartphone, smartwatch, iPods, the Apple Store, iPads, then the AirPods, and so forth. To this day, are providing new hardware, new devices, which are device creating, marketplace creating opportunities. Now, over the past 2 years, the business press has talked about how it's going to be more difficult for Apple to provide this opportunity value exchange because maybe we've run out of opportunities for devices. Well, I don't believe that, and you don't believe it. But the business press says now maybe Apple's turning to software. Well, we've seen this in the past few days with the release of its new operating system 18. Apple has released hearing aid software for its AirPods
Mhm.
so that people can, even if they have good hearing, they can manage the level of noise around them by downloading this software and with doing the standard settings on their iPhone, control the level of noise around them. Software opportunity creating value exchange. And all along, Apple has just, because of its innovation, because of these new devices, because of the new software, people have paid more for products and services because of the perception of value that they want. In terms of investment value exchange, well, Apple became the first trillion-dollar company out there, providing significant return to investors. Then in terms of institutional, the Apple brand has been significantly valued. People are lining up for hours to get each new release of the iPhone. You don't see that with other brands of smartphones out there. And then, of course, the whole name Steve Jobs provides the leadership value exchange. So this is just the basis of how we see Apple as a definition of providing all of the types of value exchange. And I'm going to stop talking now, Tom, and turn it over to you to dig deeper into this because there are many layers of value exchange here. Tom.
There are. Uh, so one of the things I think, and first of all, Deirdre, we have to say, it's very hard for anybody to focus on anything right now. There's so much undercurrent of just feeling of insecurity and disruption, and it has all kinds of issues. It happens to be with our time. It it might be an election somewhere. It might be, you know, issues in a certain part of the world. It could be, natural disasters. There's always seems to be something. And so what we want to be able to do, though, is to give you something that you can at least, you will be paying attention to this because many people, if they don't use these, their employees use them, these devices, and perhaps you and your family do. And it's important to know what's going on, but it's also important to see what can you learn from this, right? What can we learn by taking this apart? And there are a few interesting things I think you and I say about this. We actually have a bunch of these queued up for the next few weeks already because we see interesting things. So we're limiting our time to 40 minutes because we think that's all the attention that anybody has to or could manage these days. But one of the things that I think, Deirdre, and again, we actually help people who work at Apple, have worked at Apple. So
Yeah.
when we talk about this, we're not talking about it from their point of view. I'm sure they could tell you much more about what the intention of the Apple institution is. What we're talking about right now is it from the point of view of a user,
Yes.
because we believe that what the future is showing and the current marketplace is about the user, not about the institution. And that the real value exchange needs to be thought of as what does the user get? So, in other words, you and I are trying to very carefully focus our work on giving something to somebody today that they can use today that's relevant today
Right.
and not something that they can use a year or 2 years from now because we don't think people have the attention span for that. So we think that what really matters this moment is the individual and how the individual sees all these things. And not every institution is focused on the individual. Now, you pointed back to the beginnings of Apple when it was trying to make it fun and an interesting experience for the user. Uh, and part of the experience, the one of the trends that you and I see in the tech world is that we've seen that the shift from the industrial age to the digital age has caused one of the fundamental things, the way of learning, to move from being taught or teaching yourself through a curriculum to being you learn by using. So again, if we want another uh, point on the target, that ought to tell you something, right? That these devices, as we talked about a few times recently, they don't come with a user manual,
Right.
right? And nothing pretty much comes with a user manual. Or if it does, the type is so small, not even young people can read the user manuals that are provided, or you have to download a PDF if you can manage to find it. But it's the whole concept of how you learn has shifted in the minds of the users,
Mhm.
right? And so that's telling you that the user is expecting something. And when the institution doesn't provide that, the expectation doesn't match the user, you have a problem. So if you deliver something to me today and I can't figure it out by using it, but I have to read a manual, it's frustrating. And that's to me, right? You would think that I would not be frustrated. I am frustrated. I want to be able to put it together intuitively. One of the things that Apple has done and they continue to do is focus, from my point of view now, opinion of one, opinion of two, not from how the institution may be strategized. And we have people that could tell us right now if we called and asked, but I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to say, how do I see it, right? And how do
Mhm.
you see it? It's how do I respond to these devices? I never think twice about updating to the iPhone. I'm running the iPhone 16 right now, 15, not the 16, but I would have no problem going down and getting a 16. Wouldn't even think about it. Wouldn't even think about, okay, what's new there that would bother me. The moment that the version 18.1 came out, I uploaded all my devices, every single one of them sitting around here to 18.1. Didn't even think about it. Now,
Mhm.
why did I not think about it? Because if I had thought about it from the institution's point of view, I would have been afraid about, oh, wait a minute, what about reliability? What about performance? Right now, I don't, I used to use the beta versions. I don't because they're very clear. If you're doing productive work, production work, stay off the betas.
Mhm.
So I'd use the production version. I mean, look, I downloaded it all yesterday and we're doing production work. I was doing it minutes after I did that. Why? Because I have a my my expectation is that Apple is approve is a point prove is a is focusing on the user's perception of value. And my perception of value goes into their design, their integration, their interface, their accessibility, the point you just made. It's the performance, the reliability. I mean, I could keep going on. I'm not terribly excited about their customer support, but because I have to, it doesn't always help, and it's sometimes difficult. But it's rare I have to even turn to that.
Mhm.
So it's not something that is a big enough negative that it causes me to see it as what you and I would call a negative value exchange. So what we're talking about here, and the reason I went through this 5 minutes, is it's about how I, as a user, am seeing the value. Now, you and I deal, and we're actually dealing this very moment, with products that do not approach it from the point of view of the user. They approach it from the point of view of the value of the organization.
Right.
And if you're deep enough into this, you see it perhaps this way. Anybody that is trying to turn themselves into a platform or a workspace and they try to get me to adopt it and they make it hard for me to not adopt it becomes what you and I would call a negative value exchange. So what do I mean by that? It means instead of causing me to feel okay about proceeding and moving forward with new releases, new products, more use, more encompassing brand loyalty, the more encompassing of adopting their ecosystem, what happens is I start to try to pull away. I try to shut off pieces. I find myself always, and everyone has to do this, X out something that's on the screen that's trying to get me to move in the direction they want to move in, not in the direction I want to move in. There is a value exchange issue. And this is the point about value exchange that you and I say, people, that whenever you're, especially in the entrepreneurial area and the tech area, it's critical that you think about this being an exchange. It's an exchange of value. You, as the institution, have created something hard or soft, and it, you believe, has value to me, the individual, the user. I have to see something. I may not see the exact value that you think I see, but I have to see something. And not only do I have to see it, I have to then value it. Then I have to establish, is it worth me returning a value in exchange. It may not be, right? This is some of the flaws in the freemium model moving to the pay model. I'm willing
Right.
to use it and adopt it as a free because yes, I find value, but I'm not finding value enough to pay for it, right? We all know the difficulty of that model. That idea is what you and I are talking about here. And it comes out even with experienced business people. You and I, 2 summers ago, we were dealing with somebody that was struggling with this. They had a business, they have a business, and they were trying to launch a different part of that business, a software business inside a different type of business. They could not understand this value exchange. They could not articulate this value exchange, meaning what is it that you're giving the marketplace that they would value, and how does the user value it, and are they willing to return something to you that's valuable to you so that you can create that equation, right? That's the concept we're talking about. Apple does it extraordinarily well. Now, I'm just saying that they do it well. You may not like Apple. You may not like their devices. You may not resonate with their design philosophy because part of the whole concept here is their design philosophy, all the way from the user experience through the actual, experience of the physical device, to the point where when Steve Jobs was running Apple, he did not like any screws to be physically in sight, from the user, anything the user saw. He didn't want any screws visible. Well, Apple has gone away from that, and I'm sure I could guess why. But that concept is a critical concept, Deirdre, and we think Apple goes there. So I'm going to stop here. I want to move into what did they just do with the release of 18 and the release of 16, in when they did this recently. But I'm going to stop and let you pick up from here before we get into that piece. So sorry about the long rant on value exchange, but getting into the subtlety of why are we picking Apple? Why are we not picking Zoom? Why are we not picking Microsoft? It's because they see that user value proposition, excuse me, value exchange occurring, and they at least for their own users, for a lot of them, there is a good value return. And as you see it, it's actually what the institution is seeing and producing in the marketplace.
Correct. And this sounds like so obvious a concept, but it's actually a very subtle concept. So I think that everything you were saying helped people really understand the depths to which this concept extends in a company. Some of my comments right now relate to, because this is what we also try to do in these weekly briefs. We try to tell people how to do this themselves. And just go through a couple of things that Apple was thinking about when it was creating the opportunity, the investment, the institutional value exchanges. But then also note that in our longer video, we go into a longer discussion connecting the concept of value exchange to the organizing structure we've been talking about. This organizing structure has to do with the three aspects of assess, decide, and accomplish. And we've released videos, we've released printed articles on these three concepts. And it underlies a lot of how an organization can perceive and then deliver on the value exchange. For example, in an opportunity value exchange, Apple clearly had to understand what value it wanted to provide to its marketplace. That's not as obvious as people may think. There are different types of value. I'm not talking about the different types of value exchange, but here is it that we want to provide a value of the perception of I'm a more free-spirited person who wants a turquoise computer, as opposed to one who wants an industrial gray IBM computer. Then it has to provide this opportunity value exchange, develop the products and services to match that particular vision. Then it has to have the additional attributes that support those products all toward creating that value. Apple did things like its store design. Its store design matches the product design, the very sleek, the modern interiors. Certainly initially, the Apple stores I'm familiar with have done away with the Genius Bar, but that was all part of, at the beginning of the Apple Store experience, part of the whole Apple experience. You could bring your computer in and talk with one of their geniuses. They're all part of their branding, their institutional value exchange. Then they had all of the product and service components allowing charging higher prices. These are the Apple Care cards. Now, I tend to buy Apple Care cards simply because I want the value of being able to pick up the phone and talk with an Apple person if I'm having an issue. And some of that comes because you and I tend to push our Apple devices in certain ways. So I want to have backup there, and my Apple card uh, gives me that value. So these are all things that contribute to the opportunity value exchange. From the investment value exchange, it's that investors not only get the financial returns, and we know they got tremendous financial returns, but they want to become part of the success. They want to say that, oh, yes, I invested in Apple. I've got this many shares of Apple and so forth. And then the high attention to the product design and brand pay off with the opportunity value exchange delivering a higher revenue, which is the treadmill that I was talking about, tying in with the higher investment value exchange. And then the institutional value exchange. Well, where do we start? Think back to the 1984 ad. That was an ad which ran one time on the Super Bowl, and it featured a lot of business drones sitting in a big auditorium and the Apple person coming in with a sledgehammer and breaking this. Now, I've heard that that ad only ran one time, and here we are, decades later. People still talk about that ad, talk about institutional value exchange, building into the brand of people who want to buy a turquoise computer to do design stuff as opposed to the institutional things. And then think about the Apple advertising over the years. Now, the iPod is no longer a product because it's been replaced by other Apple things. But when it first came out, it had these dancing silhouettes, which you hadn't seen before. This is all part of the avant-garde brand that Apple was building there. And this branding became possible because of the quality of the products and the quality of the services. It all ties together. And that they met the definition of value. And this, you mentioned, and we talk about it all the time, the shift from the industrial age to the digital age. You mentioned that Apple has driven a lot of the shift from the industrial age um, to the digital age. But think about in terms of the institutional value exchange, how Apple has met the definition of value in the digital marketplace in terms of innovation, style, attitude, and the picture of leadership there. So I'm going to stop at this point because I've tried to set up how just meeting these aspects of the organizing structure, and we get into this in the other video, and people can watch that video to really see us dig into this, and we do dig into it, to let you take over here and talk about the 1618 innovation here.
Yeah, so again, all of it is driven, Deirdre, by a focus on the user. Even
Yes,
back then, it was
yes.
the focus on the user. And this, I think, was the part of the genius of Steve Jobs, right? He was so focused on the user and the quality of the user experience. And you can feel the difference.
Yes.
You can feel the difference in just the way you respond to the product or the service from a company, whether they focus on the user or they don't. And
Right.
when they don't, they are focusing on themselves. And
Correct.
that is so if you and I are giving any thought about what can you who are running companies, as we know people that are getting this run companies, what can you do is constantly remind yourself who is using my product and what is that value exchange that I expect? And am I doing my fair share? And are they doing theirs, right? It's
Right.
both parts.
Right.
Because if they're getting a lot of value and they're not returning, that value in kind to you, it's not a good value exchange, even though you may be producing incredible value proposition to them, right? And this is where you and I, if we're going to do anything, it's to keep your eye focused on why are you doing this? You're doing all of this to get a value exchange, whether it's directly from the user or it's indirectly from people who are funding it for the user, and that's the not-for-profit model as an example, or anything like that. So that's the first piece. And then secondly, when you're involved in one that is in this monetization, when you're thinking about this exchange, not monetization, you're thinking about this exchange, is the exchange of value to you? Is it worth it to you? Right. So
Right.
there's two sides to this equation, and that's the piece that no matter what's going on, you may just be distracted by a lot of other things, but keeping that in mind is probably the one thing I would leave. Now, what did Apple do with their recent announcement? Especially, it was a focus on not necessarily the device, but more about the software version 18 for the mobile devices and 15 for the desktops. It was they're putting in place the improvements needed to be able to drive cross-platform use of the products and the ease of use of that cross-platform. And the fun, basically, they put in place the capability to build um, AI models that would allow that to occur in a smoother way. And that also means that you've got all the capability eventually to move yourself into, and this had to do with the M4 chip, all that sort of the improved M4 chip. So performance to allow for the capability of using that kind of compute capability. But I think, again, this is not having any inside information, but just thinking about it from the point of view of what I saw happen in the market. When they announced they were going to put that functionality, they were going to basically put AI in the phone, it caused a lot of people a lot of problems, including you and me, right? Because we understand this
Yes.
subject, right? And you and I always go to worst case, right? We think, okay, you don't have guardrails, you have access to all my data, this could be disastrous. You could take over my device, right? I think in response to that from not people like you and me, but from very high profile people, they back down to saying, so maybe we should just use this slightly differently in here, but have it available for us to begin to implement over time and make it perhaps even more user uh, decision to use it, not institutionally decision to use it, meaning them.
Right.
So I was very happy about that. Uh, Now, again, I always take everything down, right? Because I want to see what it's doing and why is it doing what it's doing, right? But one of the things I do value is that cross-platform functionality, but I don't want to adopt every single thing they're doing at the exclusion of using other things. So the other thing I would say to take away is that though, and you and I talk to a lot of people. A lot of our peers are incredibly frustrated with large institutions who continue to try to push their strategy on me.
Correct.
And it is not, we want the option, if we think it's good and it's valuable, then I will take a calendar program and use it, but I don't want to run my workspace off a calendar, right? And I
Mhm.
don't want to run it off a communication platform, and I don't want to run it off an operating system unless I choose to do that. But the fact that we have a number of companies that are trying to force us into that by putting up barriers to us, um, is what you and I are talking about. And Apple has done a pretty good job so far of making all that a focus on me, and I can choose to adopt it if I don't want to, and not adopt if I want. I mean, I know people who have very old iPhones and very old iPhone operating systems and still run every single
Yeah,
day because they don't want to update. You and I
right,
know a lawyer who refuses to update anything from the first time they've read all the details. Right.
right.
So with that, I know we've come to the end of our 40 minutes, but I want to just come back to, so what are we, what have we summarized what we've talked about? I'll let you summarize what we've talked about today, that is, that people can take away from the focus on value exchange and a focus on Apple and the whole idea of the user versus the institution.
Um, well, we've introduced the whole concept of the value exchange, and we've held up Apple as a company that got it right, got it right from the very beginning because it worked a little differently, perceived value even before, and sometimes people say about this, well, who knew that users wanted a smartphone? Well, you could perceive that that's where people's wants were going to go. Once you look back at it, it's not that astonishing that the first smartphone was developed. But it has to be in the mindset of the company to look for the opportunities where they perceive users will want that value and be able to exchange for it. And what's so important to me, and we're continuing to talk about value exchange because it's so important, a concept. What's interesting to me is once you have in your mind the concept of value exchange, you can see where it doesn't work in the
Yes,
marketplace or where
yes.
there's a breach. I mean, look right now, McDonald's. You're supposed to be able to walk into McDonald's and buy food that doesn't give you E. coli poisoning, a breach in the value exchange. Look at a massive breach in this Boeing right now. Big aeronautics company that provided such value across the board, and now it's not providing value. Its aircraft are crashing. And it's leaving astronauts up in space where other people have to go and retrieve them and so forth. Or look at department stores, which provided significant value when people had to shop on unconstrained time, so they wanted everything in one store. And now people's shopping habits have changed. So either a department store change is creating new value by how they approach the marketplace, or they're going out of business. And we're seeing this all the time. And I could go on and on and on. And anyone reading the paper can just, once you have this concept in mind, see this. So I'll merely say, Tom, that this is just the beginning of our discussions on value exchange. We'll have more on it. And we look forward to hearing from people with their questions on the topic of value exchange. And
Yes,
with
we've already gotten some on artificial intelligence and putting together
and
playlists for
and
people that want to go deeper on our stuff, but
and other questions, and we love getting these questions. So
we
please
do,
channel them
we
to
do.
us.
But it
And
just means that we've got a few more things we need to build, Deirdre.
but we love doing it, Tom, don't
We
we?
do. Yes, we do it for the love, that's for sure.
That's it.
All right. It's great to see you as usual.